This should be interesting. So, you're living in Seattle?
Olympia, south of Seattle, by a couple
Oh,
hours drive. But
cool.
yeah, so
Nice.
it when people ask me why I moved here, it's like, well, it reminded me of Hollywood in the '90s. It's just that kind of dirty. So,
Yeah, and like
and it's not, yeah,
the third wave feminist punk movement was also there too. There's so much history. Like it's so
yeah,
cool. I've always wanted to visit Olympia.
yeah. Olympia is a great town. If you, especially if you're into that scene in particular, it's got a lot of good elements of it here. It's you know, it's an interesting place. It's only, I think, 80,000 people. So it's not, compared to like Los Angeles, it's not a big city at all.
I'm with it. I like it. It's chill.
Yeah, yeah. My wife and I moved up here 3 years ago when we were both tired of LA. So,
Yeah. And I can't imagine why, probably.
no, a good number of reasons, but that's a lot of my own personal history, and then you know, sometimes you got to move away from where you grew up. So,
Yeah, you're
which I
telling
think you
me.
can relate to. More of your more European.
I fled the country. It's a bit extreme.
Yeah.
All right,
Uh,
so let's get started. So I guess if you want, you can tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got introduced into Scientology.
okay. Well, since I was basically born in, my parents were both identified as Scientologists when I was born, and during my early upbringing. Uh, so I mean, didn't really have a choice about it, kind of right off the bat. But I wasn't really. Let's see. Well, I grew up in the Los Angeles area until I spent some time moving back and forth between LA and Boston. So, but that's kind of part of the story. So it goes a little bit all over the place. But yeah, it starts in the LA area when I was taken out of public schools. I was going to a normal uh, Glendale Unified School District schools until third grade, and then that's when I was taken out and sent to a Scientology private school in particular, and changed schools every year or two after that. From that point, so I was at that school for 2 years, and then I was at a different Scientology school for a year. And then my parents got divorced, so there's like seventh grade in public school at the same at the yeah. So it was the same junior high school that or middle school that my sister had gone to. She's 7 years older than me. She got a normal education.
Uh-huh.
She wasn't indoctrinated nearly the same way that I was. Um, so yeah, so then it was back to Scientology schools, one of which I got kicked out of, and then one that I graduated from, but the diploma is clearly. I wish I had it with me. I could show you. The seal. There's no California Board of Education seal on it or anything. It's this. The seal is Creators of Tomorrow Incorporated or something. It's like what does that even mean? It's not just complete nonsense.
That's wonky. Okay.
So, but then pretty much, and then right from there, I mean, that's you're as an example, when I was 15 living in Boston, that was the year that I was living with my dad. It was, go to a Scientology school, ride my bike to a Scientology school, go to school there for 8 hours, uh, go home, get a little bit something to eat, get on a bus, go down to the local Scientology center that's, different than the Scientology school, do my Scientology specific education there, and then go home, take a bus back home, uh, go to, like, I didn't even have time for my homework from my Scientology school because I was supposed to be doing Scientology coursework. Like, it was, these, you know, I was in the thick of it because that's what I had to do. You
Yeah.
know?
What a mess.
So there was some, yeah. So,
So
but then, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
you got so your parents were into Scientology before you were born, and then you got taken out of
Mm-hmm.
public school at 3 years old. How did your parents get into Scientology? So somewhere between, I guess like your sister's birth and your birth, they veered into that direction of life. But how did that come about? Do you know?
Um, Somewhat. That was they were introduced by a mutual friend in I want to say mid '70s. My sister was born in 1971. I was born in 1978, and it's not a contiguous family either. We have different fathers, but I was still raised by her dad. So, and I didn't know that her dad wasn't my dad uh, until my parents got divorced.
Oh,
Like, I didn't know he was my biological father until then. Uh, so it was one of those things where, like, um, Scientology encourages you to kind of invalidate or at least be critical of like the general social construct around you anyway. Uh, so it was perfectly reasonable for for me as supposed to be an adult in a tiny body. That's how Scientology kids are treated. Uh, it's like, oh, this is, you get to decide what your relationships are. Society doesn't do that. You can do that. If you want me to be your dad, I can be your dad, kind of thing.
wow.
So we did intentionally forge that relationship together, but it was only in retrospect, much later, that I found out that it was really just that relationship. The only thing that held it together for my dad on his end was Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as I was willing to be groomed for Scientology, he was willing to be a dad.
So it was very
So,
comfortable.
yeah, so it's, in retrospect, it was very transactional. I didn't realize that at the time at all, because you're a kid. Like, even if you feel like something's wrong, everything feels like something's wrong, and you got to be talked into eating your broccoli.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Okay. So, what are some of the moments or some pieces that jump out to you from your childhood and from switching schools all the time? Like, can you remember some odd or some things that felt especially weird, or just little pieces or moments where your parents had cracked and didn't follow the rules of Scientology, or just anything out of the ordinary from your childhood?
um, let's see.
Or just something that didn't resonate with you, something that just did not feel right or safe?
Well, I think one of my cousins actually, she was a few years older, younger than me. She said it best when she was, looking at, the Scientology educational book titles, and one of them is called Learning How to Learn. And she just said it. She's like, that's weird. That's off. And that resonated with me. It's like, yeah, she's got that figured out. Learning how to learn. Uh, Sounds like you're overthinking it. So as far as like little clues, little things from like childhood onward, I don't want to say that, I kept an inventory of these things or anything of that nature. But it was definitely, things started to add up differently, as time went on.
Yeah, and I guess
And
it was also normal to you. You had no contrast. You had
exactly.
No different experience.
There's no, yeah, that's exactly right. There's nothing to compare it to. And I just got a letter from a friend. Oh, yeah, yes, I caught that too. So, so my wife and I are very detail oriented, and this is not a criticism, but she passed me a note that said, "You said third grade," but then when she read back her note, uh, she said 3 years. You said 3 years old, and so
So third grade, not 3 years.
yeah, so a point of like in the moment fact checking.
Got
I
it.
was taken. I was heavily indoctrinated at starting at 8 years old when I was taken out of third grade.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So she's gonna put on her headphones and do some proofreading.
Okay, no problem.
You know, so.
I have a couple papers that need some references and some editing, so I'll shoot them over.
Okay, no. At the end of the day, we're both because her mother was an educator. She was and also an English teacher. And my mom, on her way out of Scientology, essentially went back to school, got got a few diplomas, and it has recently retired from being a public high school teacher. So it's one of the, so we're both the children of educators, and even though I have no formal education, it's one of those things where I'm, when she was in the thick of like, and she taught at a magnet school, so when she's in the thick of like, grading papers, it's like, all right, here's the obvious idiots in my class, go through, grade those, you'll get a laugh. But I would help her around Christmas time, because it's midterm.
I really appreciate it, actually.
Yes, so
I speak I speak to a lot of people who feel really weary about what they're saying. They're not very confident in what they're saying, and they get a little overwhelmed and they get confused. So I'll do that to you. I'll repeat back, some pieces of the conversation. Can you see me?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just playing with the settings because this is the first time I used this program, so I just wanted to make sure that I could see and hear you properly.
Yes.
So yeah, I was just looking around. But yeah, we're So let's see. But yeah, in the context of my childhood, yeah, there is no real context. There's not a lot of ways to compare, which is actually really sad because until I was taken out of school, some of my closest childhood friends were Mormon, as an example, but just, yeah. So it's one of those things where there's enough similarities to the abuses of Scientology in terms of how they isolate people and whatnot. It's normalized enough throughout the culture that it just kind of blends in a little bit. In the 70s and 80s, the difference between a working class Mormon family and a working class Scientologist family wasn't all that different. They, both heavily involved in their church, both heavily, tithing in a lot of cases and doing a lot of, although in Scientology it's ratcheted up, it's very transactional. So it's so there's enough about, at least where I grew up, just sort of the suburban culture around it, where it blends in real nice. So.
Oh, okay, so that makes sense. So even at 8 years old, you weren't able to tell the difference. And then you said that you got kicked out of one of the schools. Why was that?
That was a number of things. But it culminated, we had a very strict dress code at this particular school. And, is like boys weren't allowed to have long hair, nothing past the collar. So I was constantly pushing that threshold. Um, and it was, and I was, generally in trouble for things. Because also the tendency to, it's somewhat modeled after like mastery learning, or like more of a Montessori education. So you do, one thing that was good for me as far as how I was able to address topics is I would just study uh, English grammar for a couple of weeks. Like that's pretty much all I covered for the bulk of my studies during the day. Kind of, this is just breaking down sentence structures, et cetera, et cetera. And not that they had particularly good textbooks, but that approach for me was like, okay, I can absorb that information. Whereas like a more traditional high school, breaking up your subjects into different periods. I mean, my 1 year of a proper middle school showed that I didn't do too well with that. I would get lost between history and math, and I would just bomb math constantly. I'm sure if you change the order of my classes, maybe something that would be different. But realistically, I'm into deep dives. So anyhow, I digress. That's way off topic. I got kicked out because, as an example, when I was studying chemistry, I was like, well, now's a good time to make black powder. And that was, what counted as school credit. But yeah, it was just starting small, then like, pushing the envelope a little bit. Some of us were making napalm. Uh, we were just doing unsafe things and not terribly supervised situations. I mean, there was, there's certain things that we could get, we got away with, but and we only got in trouble when things went wrong. So not that I ever burnt the place down or anything like that, but things would go mildly wrong, and I would get, people were like, what the hell are you even thinking after the fact? Instead of like, maybe you shouldn't have given me the keys to the cabinet. It's like, there's in retrospect some things where I could have used some guidance. I didn't need, but it's so as things piled up, it was I was already pushing the envelope on the hair length problem for them, and then I came back after a weekend with some friends where whereas I came back with purple hair after a weekend, and they told me to handle it that night or just don't bother coming back to school. So so I shaved my head, and that didn't go over well. And it's like, I just dyed my hair purple. I normally have like a reddish blonde hair. There's no real stripping that out without like, it, and it's all like a DIY thing. It's like I'm not a hairdresser. I'm just improvising here.
Yeah.
So, but like you do when you're 15, 16, and that was too much. So so yeah, and that was like right at the beginning of the month. So my parents had just paid the tuition, and they weren't going to refund it. My dad got all pissed off because then, it was the other branch of the school that was in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So he blamed it on me, that because he would have to then, like if I was living with him, he would have to send me to a public school, and he wasn't going to do that. And so he's not going to let me like come visit him for like a year on, year off. Like I could only visit for summers and shit like that. Like, cause I had to go to a Scientology school,
Okay.
and
Well, it sounds like
yeah,
a series of events, like a ripple effect. And the bottom line is that you should have been supervised properly. So all of this probably wouldn't have built up and snowballed and happened, right?
yeah. I mean, well, and that's the thing is, we are treated like, as children, we are treated like tiny adults. You're just a fully formed, entity that happens to be inhabiting a child's body. You don't need to be taught things necessarily. You just need to be given enough to remember. in
Okay.
a lot of cases, you know.
Okay.
So it's not. So on the one hand, yeah, there's some fairly decent approaches to, some types of, at least, they have their own system of education and learning, and yeah, you can learn Scientology through that system really well, so to speak. But it's in that you don't you don't learn to ever be critical of it, so you can't really call it learning, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can be educated to do certain Scientology tests, but you
Okay.
can't ever really think about it. So,
So you're
but
only shown like one side of something, but like you never see the reverse. It's kind of like that. Like you are given something to learn and memorize, and that the book stops there. Kind of like that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. There's no, yeah. So you don't. The hardest thing to see is the thing that's not really. The hardest thing to see is the thing that's like missing. It's like because it's literally not there, so you can't think of like. You have a hard time thinking of that opposite sometimes, especially as a kid.
Yeah.
So, and then when you're raised up in that environment, it's very easy to just stay with that mindset.
Hmm.
So, or at least keep those blind spots because you don't even know you're there. They're there. You don't see them.
All right. So you're going through life. You said you're
Mm-hmm.
on 15, 16. You got kicked out of school. You have these blinders on. Your dad is pissed.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
So then I did end up getting in, going to another, Scientology school that was based in the LA area. Just that was kind of a standalone thing. So I did my last 2 years of what would have been high school there. And then since there's no real, um, there's no career counselor, there's no, uh, you're just left to kind of, here's the curriculum, you do that. As far as what you do with the rest of your life, there's always Scientology stuff you can do, and that's and also in the LA area, but like in the 80s and 90s, and pretty much always because it's still happening. But yeah, the people who would then join the C organization, which is the billion-year contract portion of uh, of the church, they recruit very heavily from those schools, especially in the LA area, because their main complexes are in Hollywood and Southern California, and those are their international headquarters, things like that. So yeah, and these guys would show up at these recruiters would show up at every school, and sometimes, more often than not, the school would just let them in, and there was never really any conflict because, it's all connected. You know, all that person who's going to recruit has to do is write a knowledge report about the principal of some school and make sure that the right person at Applied Scholastics gets a hold of it because they can threaten to pull that school's uh, licensing for the materials. It's all a money flow anyway. So it's if you're not licensed to use those materials and et cetera, I mean, the school is tithing to the church just as heavily as any of the
Mm.
individual churches are tithing to the church. They spend a lot of money.
So the schools are at the mercy of the church?
Absolutely, absolutely. It
Mm.
is. Yeah, there's no. There's a line on paper that divides the two, but it's there's no real division. It's um, in fact the way it works is, you have the main kind of church body, and then you have what they call Able International, and that's where they're Applied Scholastics, knocking on all their this isn't Scientology, but this is, Scientology technology, for the, it's their brands and takes on things and methodologies for either education or drug rehab or whatever their shtick is. And it's all their self-betterment wing. And yeah, those people that work there, they get paid, the California minimum wage, but, they, somebody higher up that outranks them in the church can, tell them to do anything, and they have to do it. So the hierarchy goes all over the place, even though, there's places like Abilent and Bridge Publications, or I think it's Galaxy Press now, or whatever it is. There's certain things that the church has to structure specifically as a corporation, but it's still church Sea Org members that are staffing those organizations, and they don't give a shit about what's on the paper. They listen to their chain of command.
Got it. So if schools act as direct recruitment then?
Absolutely. Yeah, they're absolutely recruitment pools.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, yeah. I mean, the crossover is really close. It's when I was at school in Delphi, Los Angeles, one of the main sort of, forget exactly, one of the central figures in the school there, she was married. She still is married to one of the main attorneys for Scientology.
Oh.
So I mean, the connection is right there. And there's a lot of crossover like that where, the person's involved in the school and their spouse is like, somebody unexpectedly super important. It's like, oh, that's, yeah. So there's no dividing line between it. I mean, so.
Nothing is.
But yeah, I mean, that's the. Yeah.
So, okay. So, you were basically, you were subject to the recruiting, if I had to guess, and heavily.
Yeah, very heavily. Yeah, it was. I mean, when I got a summer job at a normal people corporation in the middle of Glendale, like they showed up at work.
Oh.
And like, hey, we need to talk to you about this. Well, I get a break. I get a 15-minute break, and this is super important. It's like they're basically, I got to clock out now and go have this conversation with you, and like just no boundaries whatsoever, and just trying to explain to everyone's like, no, this is really important. So yeah, they showed up at where I was working at like a normal, like these aren't the people working there, not Scientologists. I'm just doing a little summer warehouse job. So, but yeah, that was once again, 15, 16 years old, somewhere right around there.
Okay. So
yeah, I think,
and so at 18, like other people that don't go to Scientology schools?
Yep. And then from there, kind of don't have anything to do. Yeah, there's nobody really tells you how to start applying for colleges. You never took an SAT. You have this diploma that, I mean, nobody ever, I've gotten plenty of jobs that required a high school education as a minimum, and nobody ever checks, that the school that you went to was legitimate, at least for the jobs that I went, that I applied for. So it goes on my resume, but it's not accredited, and nobody ever checks. So it kind of doesn't matter. Like functionally, it doesn't matter. It, as far as making my way in the world, nobody has once cared about my high school diploma. But so from there, yeah, I joined the Sea Org. 18, I did their sort of introductory program, because it was either that or try and get a job at the company where I was like doing inventory and winding electromagnetic coils. It's not. I had no career path, no career consultation, and not a lot of great skills to just sort of run out and do things. So I mean, it's kind of when they're when the only ideas you're allowed to have are Scientology ideas, and yeah, there's not a whole hell of a lot wrong. That's like you're not spotting the red flags that are there. Yeah, you just kind of keep doing that because that's all you know. It's the only thing that has any context. Um, so plus, moving around, changing schools a lot. I didn't retain. I retained a small group of friends over time, but I didn't ever really integrate into a particularly large social circle. So, my graduating class was like 4 people, 3 people. it's, it's tiny, so there's a certain like, this is the most, the most quickly expanding religion on the planet or whatever it was. And it's like, yeah, going to a Scientology school with all these other Scientology kids. There's 4 or 5 of us, it's like, great.
So maybe like you
Fastest.
decide to expand your social circle and to have a place where you can meet people, and that seems stable, and you had no other options really that you were aware of. So are those things all what made you want to join the Sea Org, or do you feel like you had an obligation to join?
Those were all the things that were there. I knew that because I was kind of a part of it, I knew that I was basically groomed for doing Scientology type work. And in a lot of cases, I was also hungry for approval. I didn't get a lot of validation, so I kind of became the person that I was being trained to be, even though that was greatly at odds to my personality and my values, which, so it was, but there was essentially, because I was a true believer at that time as well, because I didn't have any good reason to believe in anything else. And, I was trained to be dogmatic and think in black and white terms. I was very easy to convince at a certain point. And it was my mom during my teenage years that was saying, no, you gotta, at least you can do what you want when you turn 18, but as long as I have to sign off on sending you, signing away my parental responsibility, because that's what a lot of Scientologist parents do. She refused to, so, I mean, my mom's kind of pretty much always been on my side since day one. That's kind of a whole other story, but that was the stand that she took, which ultimately was for my benefit, because if I'd gotten in when I was 14 rather than 18, it would have been a much different story. But not that my story is particularly great. So, but yeah, at 18, on my grandmother's birthday, I basically run away to join the Sea organization because my mom didn't want me to go. There was like, everybody was asking me, what are you going to do now that you're out of school? And it's like, I always had a really bad relationship with schools and schooling, so I wasn't going to go continue to do more school, at a community college or at a university or anything. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have, the complete lack of any ideas really just kicked in. It's like, well, I guess this really is my only option because I don't have any other better scenarios or ideas or anything. So,
do you remember the reasons why your mom didn't want you to join?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think she knew that there was something not quite right because, she did sort of a long, slow walk out as she, established her own life and detangled things. And it's kind of the safest way to do it is do the slow, long walk out. Because if you do it fast, then there's a lot of social retaliation with you getting declared a suppressive person and all your friends and family just, disavowing you completely, and that's no fun. So I mean, if you haven't built any kind of support network or any ability to self-sustain outside of it, um, you're better off just walking, in terms of your own self-preservation, because immediately losing everybody and then possibly even having to contend with lawsuits or any number of things, it's a huge amount of problems all at once to deal with, and it can be very overwhelming. So she did her kind of slow walk out as I was finishing high school, and part of what prompted her to distance herself was, just sort of observing her brainwashed son, join the Sea organization, start cutting off contact with people and just not being around, and only being around for like a few hours at a time. It's like, okay, yeah, here I am for Christmas. Okay, gotta go. We're basically neighbors. We're a town over from each other. Things like that. And always on a Sunday. Always on a Sunday, because got obligations. There's no other stuff to do. Out there saving the world or whatever.
Did you enjoy your time in the Sea Org once you joined?
No, it was terrible. Pretty much their initial training program thing took me 2 weeks to get through. That was, it was a lot of running around and, cleaning, and then like 5 hours of study a day. And then once you get put into, you're assigned an organization to work for. And for me, I was recruited by the publications group. That was Bridge Publications at the time. So I was paid like the California minimum wage at the time for, 40 hours a week, but then I was working, 60, 80, 90, 120 hours a week, lots of, 24-hour shifts, 36-hour, 24 to 36-hour things where it's like, and sometimes it was random, it's like, here's your normal set of work. And then also you have like this set of like janitorial work that you have to do. And on top of that, it's like once a week you have to fill in, on like doing some other thing like security or whatever. So you get these, you don't have like one job, you get your one job and then these various other assignments of things that come along. And then also, if one department's behind on something, well, guess what? Throw a bunch of people at it. So you get, it was, you have your own set of responsibilities, and then as well as like all these other obligations that you got to keep track of. And at Bridge in particular, nobody, I mean, the Sea Org in general, not a lot of nice people. It's realistically the whole method of getting people to be productive is basically to yell at them. At the end of the day, it's just to, start knocking shit around, slamming filing cabinets, get in their face a little bit, make them feel something. It's just like, it's like, just go in there, shake things up, stir up the pot. Yeah, that's how you get people to work. Just some of the just terrible fucking motivation methods, and if it's so, sold this whole thing of like, hey, yeah, we're in it together and all this, and it's like kind of supposed to be like this save the world hippie commune, except there's like no hippies.
So that's so
all
disappointing.
These square, angry.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Okay. So you did not like your time in the Sea Org. You were promised something that obviously wasn't what it was supposed to be. And then you didn't have
Mhm.
any other, you didn't feel like you had any other options outside of the Sea Org or Scientology in general. So how did you
Scientology.
navigate through that? How did that work in your mind?
Uh, well, I mean, it progressed with how things normally progressed for me, at least at that time, of just a series of me getting in trouble for shit, you know. And it's nonsense stuff. It's
Yeah.
these are control levels that are foisted on sort of the population. It's like, well, whatever somebody might be feeling guilty about, let's find out what they feel guilty about and hang them up for that, you know. And so there's a lot of uh, negative motivational, uh, you know, I mean, it's all, but navigating it was essentially getting in trouble over and over again for kind of ridiculous or very minor things, if anything. And then I was sent about 2 years in. I was sent to they call it the Rehabilitation Project Force, and that's where you send the real fuck ups. This is where you send all the real pieces of shit. And but they're the ones that are supposed to have like redeeming values. Otherwise, these are the people that you would kick out, but we're not gonna. You know, you get a chance to stay as long as we get to really treat you like shit. So that's, you know, essentially I wouldn't quite, I mean, it's a labor camp. You know, it's not quite the same as a full blown prison in that there are some limited circumstances where I was able to visit family, like say when my grandmother passed away, I was able to, you know, spare 6 hours for that to go, or yeah. And then immediately upon returning, after holding my grandmother's hand in the hospital as she died, or as we thought she was dying, but she was already probably dead for like a good little bit. But you know, that whole thing. Then, you know, I come back and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're on 24-hour watch again. There's always going to be somebody glued to your hip. You know, why? Well, you just had a bad experience. Well, no shit. And I came back to go. It's just but yeah, the first year I was on the RPF, I was it was the rule I couldn't go anywhere or do anything uh, alone because I disagreed with my assignment, and I was constantly, you know, doing the appropriate bureaucratic challenges to what I, you know, was terming as an injustice at the time, but that's just, you know, what they do. Um, and so because I disagreed with that, it's like, well, you know, it was just you have, if you got to go to the bathroom, you got to take somebody with you, and they got to make sure that you don't run away. And uh, so so that was so, and of course there's, you know, obviously I lost my eye there, but every 6 months, uh, you know, I needed stitches or something, uh, some kind of like something beyond first aid kind of medical attention. It's like, yeah, doctor needs to look at at least a medic, you know. And
Okay.
so
Really quick, I have some questions for you before we continue with this story. First things first, I'm hearing from like a lot of people that I'm interviewing, whenever they got sent to the RPF, they always said to me that they were treated like a piece of shit. Is this reiterated to you
yeah.
all of the time when you're in the RPF? Your
Oh, it's
this phrase?
yeah. The whole premise of why you're there. I mean, it's in the because in Scientology there's a lot of repetition of like the same materials that you have to study. So with in broader Scientology, that's the Keeping Scientology Working series of bulletins where you have to read it at the beginning of every book, every course back, everything. So it's like you get really dialed into like so with so the RPF version of that is the RPF flag orders, and the very first bulletin in there is basically Hubbard explaining how everybody who gets sent to the RPF is a complete piece of shit, and how
Oh.
it's how everybody who's like, this is where you send the people with the evil intentions, the people who keep fucking things up, the people that are like the reasons why a lot of like bad things are happening. This is where you send those people. And so there's already it was a system of punishment that was born, that evolved from the practice of throwing people in chain lockers on the ship. It's like, yeah, you just fucking live in there. You got to clean up all that. You have to clean up a portion of this ship that has never been cleaned, has never been meant to be spick and span clean, and you have to fucking live there. That's the environment that was born out of. In my time on RPF, we like, we went from living in one section of the buildings that I don't know if it was deemed too nice, but there were actually finished walls, paint, there's windows. I mean, if the roof leaked, we got to fix it. It's like, all right, get up there in the rain. Yeah, this is a real thing we did. It's like, because one of the larger men's dorms was situated in a way that was leaking. We did an overnight patch on that roof, because otherwise people wouldn't be able to sleep, and then they wouldn't be able to work and whatnot. So you're it. So the only thing we didn't do is go pick up materials, because we weren't allowed to operate any heavy machinery, which included cars, So we would have been walking down to Home Depot or whatever. Which, yeah.
So you said that you had lost your eye, and there were several instances where you needed treatment beyond a first aid kit, and you had to go see a doctor. How did that work out? Or can you recall some of the events? And I'm wondering as well, because I don't believe in, I guess, seeking medical treatment or something along these lines, that seeing a doctor is...
Dude, I'll give you a perfect example. I'll give you a couple really good examples. So the first accident, and I want to say this is like 2 months in, and this came off of, so this is 2 months in. So mind you, I'm on 24-hour watch. There's somebody that's like married to my hip the whole time. Sleeping doesn't matter. Somebody's watching me. And so I was in one of the construction units. So construction, mainly like framing, drywall, plaster, paint, less paint, but concrete work, rough carpentry, essentially. Not a whole lot of cabinet making necessarily. That was other units made a lot of in-house cabinetry. But the first unit, because I was a 19-year-old kid who was in relatively okay physical shape. So yeah, framing and drywall, get to it. So the first one was an accident with it was a sheet metal stud. I can tell you all the specifications on it, but it's long story short, and I don't know if the camera will see it.
Oh my
these
God.
3 fingers. I tried to catch a sheet of drywall, because we got hung up to dry if we damaged materials as well. So it was like so I tried to catch a sheet of drywall that somebody dropped, and it was as we were putting it up on the wall. So I, with my hand, sort of clamped it against the sheet metal stud, and there's these pass-throughs for electrical conduit and cable and whatnot, and these 3 fingers slid right into one of those, and just a nice little sheet metal cut tear on these guys. And so there's a thing in Scientology for overcoming injuries, and the kids that are raised in get a heavy dose of it, but it's called a contact assist, and it's this process of, you get injured or something, you get hit in the head with a ball or whatever. I've been like out on a ball field, like, okay, you have to go through the whole thing, put the ball back on your head and really examine the whole thing and really get into like how that injury happened, right? It's called a contact assist. Very common in Scientology. You're supposed to be able to process away the pain or whatever by thoroughly examining how it happened and what happened, and it doesn't work. It's horseshit. If anything, if it does anything, I would say it further traumatizes you, especially in terms of violent accidents and whatnot. But I call him a friend at the time because, the guy who was the in charge of that unit, who is also RPF dude, he, kind of sees me grabbing my hand. He sees a little bit of blood, and he's like, "All right, Tyler, there's two kinds of accidents. There's or two kinds of injuries. The kind where you can go ahead and do a contact assist and then go get some first aid, or you really need first aid first, right? Like, it's in the name. You really need first aid first, and so that distracted me enough to, just kind of I'm holding my hand, I look up at him, and I think about that for a second. I let go of my hand, and just blood just starts spurting out. It's just I think I need first aid. So we're idiots. From where we were framing up that room, or where we're drywalling that room, because we'd framed it the day before. I pissed myself in that room the day before because nobody wanted to go with me to the bathroom. So I had to, so from there we had to walk through the mill, the wood mill, where there's table saws and all kinds of heavy machinery where people have gotten very injured before, right? And I'm just dripping blood. This is before they had really started work in there, so I'm just dripping blood through the mill, down the stairs, down through the motor pool area. So there's so in my wake, there's also a bunch of people who are I wonder where this trail of blood goes. So I end up this weird passage. There's this a number of stories where people are I wonder where this trail of blood goes. Oh, I'm just gonna go ahead and clean it up and follow it. And then they kind of there's somebody in the mill who later told me about cleaning up my blood. Somebody had, through the motor puller is mopped this up and got really curious, but never followed the trail. Who the fuck's bleeding? Just, oh, I need to clean this up. And then we're idiots. We find some cotton balls so that gets nice and stuck in there once it's bleeding. But then as far as the logistics of getting medical treatment, because obviously I needed stitches, I needed it's not something that you can easily improvise. But there's where the Big Blue building on Sunset Boulevard, the complex, Anons call it Big Blue, Scientologists call it, either the complex or PAC. So that's, on its south side, Fountain Street. Down the street, I want to say not even 2 miles away, was Shaw Health Center, and that's where there was a group of Scientologist physicians and a couple of chiropractors that had this health practice, and most of their clientele, if not all, were Scientologists. And one of the doctors there at the time used to be Hubbard's one of Hubbard's physicians. That's Gene Dink, who's since passed away. But that was his practice, his private practice. So he was actually one of my childhood doctors, as well as another. I don't want to. I think. And then, but the person who treated me for my fingers was Dr. Megan Shields, and I don't know what her current situation is, but yeah. So in this in particular, they just kind of squeezed me in. They're not a trauma clinic, but they're Scientologists. So, they squeeze me in between appointments. They, get the cotton balls out from my embedded shit parade of mangled hand, fingers, and then stitch me up, kind of all right, we'll do this in between that. And I get charged for it personally because, it is, oh yeah, the bill doesn't go to the church. The bill is supposed to be covered by the church, but it's not like I get the bill. But, Megan does me a solid of like, hey, I only charged you for, just materials and, uh, uh, the consultation slot, basically. It's like, um, so, hey, it's nice. I got my fingers stitched up for like $100 in the late '90s, but that was my bill, and I had to request my org for them to set aside funds for that bill. It wasn't like, oh, and that got rejected week after week after week. Well, now, so I don't think that bill ever got paid. I think Shaw ended up, the health center, the actual business portion of it, ended up writing it off at some point. But there was that, and then similarly, it's much less visible, but on my left leg, I got, I don't know, probably a 7 or 8 inch cut. Luckily, on the shin in particular, but it was a saw that was dropped on me.
Oh my
gosh. So, yeah, and then so that was another thing where it's like, all right, just kind of wrap it up and take them down to Shaw Health Center and get stitched up. So yeah, my fingers were 20, 30 some odd stitches. My leg was 20, 30 some odd stitches. And yeah, another bill of another $100, $200 or whatever it was. Basically materials and, a little bit of, yeah, essentially covering the overhead and the materials for the day, which, it would be great if healthcare in the U.S. in general was built out that way. That would be a good step up.
Yeah.
Because at the same time, if I'd gone just the other direction on the street to Queen of Angels, which does have an emergency room, does have all these things, it would, which there was a cut on my left hand that I did go there for, and I straight up denied treatment, where it's like, it's not bleeding that bad. I asked what the bill was going to be. I went back to, I took the person who was watching me, because, always got some fucking buddy or another, back to, went back to PAC, and one of the medical liaison officers was playing around with like old school remedies and like was dying to test this poultice. I was like, sure, slap it on me, give me a bit. So I had this weird crusty thing on my hand, that I'm like working with for a week, until, you keep it on until it falls off. And, for what it was, pretty effective, but, dodged another $300-$400 bill because the church wasn't going to pay for it necessarily. It's like, if it was in your name, that's your stuff, that's your body.
That's weird.
Fuck the whole context of your injury. You're the one who's supposed to be at cause. That's pretty much the doctrine.
Avoiding responsibility.
So
that's weird that you would have that many people that tired, working that hard, and blaming them for being hurt, not funding any of their medical expenses. That's wrong. Okay. So then what happened with your eye?
So the eye, that was, so there is a section of the complex of the main building there of Big Blue. If you look at like the iconic picture where, the two wings are coming out, 6th floor, right in the middle, that's where one of the main elevator shafts are. And there was a number of renovations that were done to that building. There were some structural shear walls that were installed. But to get ready for that main portion, there was about 10,000 square feet on the 6th floor of that building that just needed to be demolished yesterday. So instead of like getting some equipment up there and going about it in a sensible manner, the whole RPF was about 200, 250 people at the time. And in the evenings in particular, that's where everybody's work and study schedule lines up, where you have about a 3 to 5 hour block where you got a workforce of about 200, 250 people. That's where like all the unit leaders and section leaders are supposed to get in their physical labor as well. All the people that are like involved in the technical Scientology case supervision and court and learning supervision side of it, because we're all supposed to teach and brainwash each other. That's a big part of how it is. Then you make that part of it completely non-hierarchical. It's something that you do peer to peer, and you trade positions of either auditor and pre-clear, or student and coach and things like that. So this is, instead of like doing something sensible, just throw a bunch of people at it. So with fielding that many people, 250 people to demolish about 10,000 square feet worth of like walls and like everything down to the concrete. Walls gone, ceilings gone, light fixtures gone, the power's been cut, the water's been cut, so it's like everything must go. Chutes set up by the window. It's not, you gotta kind of plan ahead if you need like 250 pairs of safety glasses. If you need 250 pairs of gloves, if you need 250 hammers, hell, even 100 hammers would have been helpful. I think between everything, and these were like milk crates of like, get all the gloves you can get together, get all the fucking safety glasses you can get together, get all the, the safety glasses are all scratched up and fucked up because they're in the same milk crate as screwdrivers, hammers and shit. The gloves, hey, we got 60 left-hand gloves.
Oh.
God. All right. So I mean, there's like shit's not fitting right, and as far as find out later when I go into the construction industry, like in the regular world, taking proper safety classes, your personal protection equipment, like your gloves, those are supposed to be your gloves, because you'll still get nicks and scrapes and shit on your hands, and you'll bleed on your gloves. If you have hepatitis, you're gonna give it to somebody. It's like little things like that. Same thing with eye and ear wear. You got an ear infection. Guess what? Those little roll-up ear protection thingies, don't share them. But we shared the shit out of that. So I didn't have safety equipment. I wasn't wearing gloves. I didn't have fucking safety glasses. I didn't have a hard hat. It was just that. So essentially, just get told to make yourself useful and fucking tear the place up. So we're kicking down walls, knocking shit over, tearing things apart with our hands, and the big piles of rubble kind of gather up pretty quick, and you got to start getting rid of those. But if you've been assigned a particular task that's not necessarily removing rubble, well, you're not going to take care of this big pile of rubble in front of you. You're going to figure out a way to walk around it. But there's no assigned work areas. There's no like, keep this area clear, we're yanking on this shit. It's all completely ad hoc. So trying to avoid one problem and just stepped right into another problem. So, and that was, once again, 3 of my friends yanking on a copper pipe and out of a wall. Just get the shit out. We're buff dudes, fucking yank it. And I was like still a good 6-7 feet away, but when it comes loose, I mean, 6-7 feet melts away real quick. Mm-hmm. And that was just, everything kind of happened at an awkward angle, the way everything twisted. It was a 3/8 outside diameter copper pipe that was, we're yanking it apart with our hands. So it's like all jagged and fucked up. So that popped me in the eye. Um, Fell over, screamed. Another sort of Scientology doctrine is that when somebody gets hurt, is you stay very quiet. That's the whole, because you don't want, that's when the reactive mind is recording and gathering information to use against you personally to ruin your life later. So that's, so you don't want to allow your voice to be any part of a later reactive episode or any kind of engrams, what they're called. So everybody goes quiet once they realize somebody's hurt. So that's surreal on its own. It's sort of like, I get popped in the face, fall over, yelling. Everybody goes quiet. And then actually the same guy who asked me, about my fingers, the same guy is like, he's like the closest person there. He was on the other end of the pipe, and he's like, "Oh shit, are you okay?" And completely shocked, traumatized. Like I try to swing at him, get up, like try to punch him, fall back over. It's just like a complete shit show. And it was one of those things where it's like I end up trying to like show people what's up, and just seeing like several people, I'm not necessarily going to name names, is just sort of like, oh, just look of horror. It's like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. And one of them told me later, it's like when I first looked at it right after the accident, it didn't look like you had an eye. It looked like it was gone. So, which is true. It was, for its part, the insides had come out. There's no lens there anymore. There's been some surgeries where the globe's been reinflated. I pass for having a normal eye, but it's not a healthy eye. It's not a good situation. So, initially, even right after the accident, it looked like it was just gone. Forget about it. So, went down to security, which also an area of the building that I built. And one of the security guards was a medic, had some medic training, so he did the initial bandaging up and everything. And Queen of Angels is just right down the street. So went over there to the emergency room, and when you go to a proper hospital, in this or as an RPF or going to a proper hospital, you have this entourage with you. You have people that are like talking. I didn't talk to a physician or a physician's assistant, nurse, or anything until I was on the table. It was like, get them laid down and everything. They're talking to everybody. I'm getting hooked up with fluids, and it's like a lot of stuff not necessarily directed at me, like when the nausea like coming out of shock sort of kicks in. I get up, go over to the sink, puke, and doctor comes by. I was like, oh, you're nauseous? Let's give you a little steroid or whatever it was to give me to try and settle my stomach, like coming out of shock. But it's not like no real interaction. It's like, oh, that happened. Let's do this. No, hi. Like I didn't know who that fucking guy was. It's like I hadn't spoken. Yeah. So I didn't actually. And and then of course this happened at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So like the daytime ophthalmological surgeon he's at home. So he got woken up, came in, and they did the initial surgery just to reinflate the eye with silicone, stitch it up. It was like, all work done under a microscope, very technical. And then from there, that was a workers' comp case. But like, I didn't really get a chance to actually, like, I retained some of the paperwork from that time. I didn't really get a chance to like sit down and read any of it until I was off, like, out of the Sea Org. in any real sense of like, oh, this is fucking important. It was all, yeah, pretty much all handled by other people. But there is some follow-ups and a follow-up. There was an attempt to reattach the retina. There was a partial retinal detachment. That didn't go well. And yeah, so blinded my left eye. Yeah, there's a couple of things, but essentially, as soon as I left, because I asked as well, it's like the way, from what I understand, how everything, or how the church's workers' comp insurance was at the time, is that it was basically an arrangement with an insurance company that they didn't really pay any premiums. They didn't pay anything. It was just when something happened, then there were some lump sums that were paid out to that company, who would then pay the hospitals and this and that. So it wasn't, they didn't have, and I never really interfaced with that insurance company.
Right.
It's like, I think I may have had one phone conversation with them that was monitored, so in that respect, yeah, there's definitely no medical privacy, and things had to go a certain way.
Okay.
Sorry, I just got off track, but
this is
so I think I was coming around to.
That's completely out of control, and that's not right. So after you had lost your eye, were you put back to work, or did they say, okay, get that guy out of there? That's enough.
Yeah, no, yeah. So after that, there's a certain amount of time that was allowed for not doing work. But during that time, is like I was pretty much always expected to be like in session getting Dianetics auditing to help fix my eye, in session, being, going through all these processes, because all these things that are supposedly supposed to, help you fix your body, or it's very not too different from Christian Science to a certain extent. It's just very extreme, the way Hubbard put it is, I don't know how much science fiction that you've read, but there's a book by Robert Heinlein called Stranger in a Strange Land. And the main character of that book, Mike Valentine, he's basically raised by aliens, but he's been taught this way to be completely over control of his organism. So he slept for 3 days and grew muscles to account for the difference in the planet he was raised on and Earth, just because he could do it. Hubbard expected that of everybody. He said Satan could grow a third arm if he wanted to, So it's like it's a real extreme sort of mind over matter sort of thing. So it's like the whole premise of Dianetics and Scientology auditing is like, we're going to fix you enough so you can fix yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there is that sort of, the layers of victim blaming, I mean, it's a fucking lasagna,
Mm-hmm.
But, nice little casserole of pain. So if I wasn't actively like sleeping, trying to, grow that eye back or whatever, I was expected to be, getting auditing, got a lot of auditing during that time period. But it was, I want to say 3 weeks after my second surgery, where it's like, hey, you got to go put in some desk work. You got to, so I want to say 5-6 weeks after the accident, I was put back to work, where it's like, you got to at least put in like 3 hours, at least put in 5 hours. Okay, you're back to it. It's So, and even then, but yeah, I mean, bandage up your eye, get to work. So,
And how are
so
you
yeah,
feeling like mentally at that time? Because in a sense, you're mentally trapped. You don't
yeah,
really know where else to go or what else to do with yourself. You're a young guy. You just lost your eye, and you have all these expectations waving over your head and in your face and following you everywhere. How did that
yeah.
go? Like, what? How did you get through that? Or what are some thoughts you were thinking
Oh,
to get through that?
I didn't get through that. That's literally the baggage that I keep with me all
Oh,
the time. That didn't go away. That's, I mean, that's the, I, really what it comes down to is, after I got out of the Sea Org, off the RPF, out into the real world, I did most of the work that I did on the RPF was primarily electrical work, followed pretty closely by, general construction, carpentry, cabinetry, plumbing, a little bit of HVAC work, mostly just duct installing. So when I got out, I at least had the physical vocabulary of a certain amount of trades work. So I did start an electrician's apprenticeship, but also I was working for a Scientologist electrical contractor. So I wasn't able to actually stop working for Scientologists until several years afterwards, just trying to figure out, expand my uh, social circle to a certain extent. But realistically, the way that's evolved is I can't work without having flashbacks. I've spent the past, I want to say, 5-6 years directly trying to address that. But uh, it got really bad at my last job in Los Angeles, and yeah. So I mean, there was definitely some fallout for that, and then it was, that was part of, what got me to leave Los Angeles, and then my last job up here in Olympia, it was anytime where I was doing like a certain amount of like facility stuff, repairs, renovation, even fixing a toilet, just like, no, I'm back running in those tunnels again. And then more recently, I was trying to help a friend out with a house renovation, and for better or for worse, I kept, you know, uh, kept injuring myself. Like I hurt myself, like not, I mean, not bad, but it was like, oh, it was always something where it was, nothing where I was going to the hospital, but I mean, I got sick. This is like my friend's house. I'm doing this mostly as a favor. And, it did, or it devolved to the point for me where it's like, I can't actually do this work anymore. I mean, even, uh, you know, so realistically right now, I'm only really coming to the point where it's like, okay, I've developed all these, you know, skills and experience, in the construction trades, but I literally can't use any of it right now.
yeah, your trade is your worst enemy.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, so, um, so as far as all of those expectations, all that baggage, it did kind of, I mean, at the time I dealt with it in that I knew what I was doing wasn't really getting me anywhere, and that's ultimately why, when I was threatened, in the Sea Org, in the Sea organization, they have this thing. You can get out a couple of ways, but there's always a fitness board that's convened either on your way in that sort of judges you and says, yes, you're fit to be a Sea Org member. And also, in order to get out, that fitness board has to reject you.
Right.
And so it's part of getting kicked out or leaving is always going before this convened group of people who are different each time. I mean, it's like, I think they try to convene it with people that are like your friends, honestly, because you always know it's not an impartial group of people. It's like, oh, it's somebody I worked with for however long, or this. So I mean, it's fairly. There's at least one or two people on there where it's like a fairly intimate experience, or at least that's the way it was with me.
So your
So
exit,
I had a friend
your
who
exit out
saying,
of
"I don't believe."
Oh, I'm sorry. We
Sorry,
keep
what?
talking at the same time. I think there's a delay. I'm sorry, but just to make
Yeah, a
things
little.
clear, your exit out of
Mhm.
Scientology happened while you were in the Sea Org?
Um, it 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 happened over a period of time, and because it struck like there's layers to every cult. So I had gotten into one of the more innermost layers. So I was just exiting that layer from like the C organization to they assumed I was going to be a public Scientologist after I, paid off my freeloaders debt and all this other shit. Um, and got back in good standing with the church, because apparently that's another Scientology doctrine is, the only reason a person would have to leave an organization stems from their bad acts against that organization or group or whatever, So the only reason why you would, want to leave your job is if you had done bad shit at work,
Right.
not because you got a better job, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. So the assumption is built in. The only reason why I was leaving, even though, it's unspoken, or not unspoken, like, even though I haven't acknowledged it yet, there's some reason there that, bad things that I did, and that's why I was leaving. Not because it was a truly fucking horrible experience from start to finish. Uh, you know, uh, but all the things that are bad about it get blamed on the individual, and all the things that are good about it are credited to the group identity. So
So, can you explain how your exit? Can you explain the process
yeah.
of you exiting out of Scientology and how that flow went? You said it went in layers. So, what were some of the layers?
So the first layer is essentially from the exit from the C organization itself to sort of the public Scientology sphere. That process itself, from the moment I was threatened with, being, kicked out, and I called the bluff, like, yeah, convene the fitness board. It's not productive for me to be here. I completely agree with you. This all sucks and is stupid. I've made zero progress on any of the things that I was supposed to make progress for, and look at me. I look like hammered dog shit. You know. uh, so um, so from the word go to me actually getting on a bus, because I wasn't allowed to stay in Los Angeles for not a lot of explicitly stated reasons. I was just sort of told, yeah, it'll be a problem if you stay here. So you're going to move to Boston with your dad. Because my mom was out of Scientology entirely at that point. She had a completely separate career, and a lot of my friends and family lived in the LA area. So it was just sort of keeping, I'm a mess, You're going to put me right back in the middle of one of the larger groups of public Scientologists? No, we're going to send you to Boston where there's like 60 people or fraction. And my dad was the true believer at the time. The guy I got, the place where I started my electrician's apprenticeship, the guy who owns that company, he was a Scientologist, and my dad, who was a Scientology minister, performed the marriage for that guy and his wife. So there was already that little bit of, a little bit of nepotism there went a long way. But I wouldn't have had that. I mean, that was like kind of the only real connection I had to anything that was slightly, and most like I was the only other Scientologist that he had it was basically him and me were the only Scientologists at his company. So, and he was trying to, get more people involved. He was like fairly new to it. He had a lot of respect for my dad at the time. So from his point of view, he thought I was like gonna just supercharge his company. I just came out of the Sea organization and like didn't really do anything wrong. This guy, like, you're gonna kick ass, right? But and I mean, he wasn't 100% wrong, but he wasn't all that right. Most of the reason why his company was successful was because he had a good intuition for contracts and change orders, and he had a good business head for it, and he personally also had, like, he worked fast. He was a good worker himself, so he knew from there how to train people, what kind of standards, standards of work that were, and he was a perfectly legit guy to work for. In that instance, there was definitely other Scientologists where I couldn't say that they were legit to work for, but he did all right. But from the public Scientology sphere, now from there, I'm expected to pay for all the auditing and coursework that I got that I received while I was in the Sea Org. So that was like a $40,000 bill that I didn't unpaid anything on, and all these other things, But at the same time, I'm still getting invited to like their Scientology events and asked to donate to the International Association of Scientologists, this or that, and yeah, you can put that in your, and asked to volunteer for things like I transported a load of like bottled water with like Scientology book labels on them instead of like little water bottle labels for some convention somewhere in the New England area. It was just sort of like did a certain amount of like volunteer work stuff, and then I didn't really start to part ways with the Scientology community until a couple of years after that. I'd moved back to Los Angeles, worked for a couple other Scientologists, doing electrical work or construction work in general, and just not getting paid. Just either the hours weren't scheduled, so it's like, yeah, you're working for me, but I only got 10 hours of work this week. Like, great, you're not paying me so much that I can live off of $10 an hour, or off of 10 hours a week at 15 an hour. I'm getting apprentice wages for journeyman work, and then it's like, oh, work just dried up. Go figure it out. Like, great. Any ideas when you're gonna have another something come around? No, not really. Like, fuck,
Totally.
So there's a lot of that working for Scientologist contractors. And not that the contracting world in Los Angeles is like particularly better than that. This is another thing where it's maybe it's a bit worse, but it's only a little bit more shady than what's generally going on anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, just think of like a shady construction company. Just think of it just a little bit dirtier than that. That's kind of a, that's figuring, like, I got into, here's a perfect example. I was driving the work van for the company to one of the client's property, and I clipped their front gate. And I didn't completely like wreck their gate for the driveway, but I clipped it with the hinge of the van. And I was able to fix the gate because I just popped a couple of welds. All right, weld this back on. But then there was, a certain amount of vehicle damage as well. And the guy who was running that company was like, dude, you owe me $1,200 for that body damage. I'm like, no, I fucking don't. That's like, yeah, you did. Like, so he's trying to hit me up for that. And it's like, I'm in your van driving your, like, no, this is what, I mean, we didn't get into an argument, but it's like, that's what insurance is for.
Yeah.
But of course, he wasn't using the proper insurance on the van. That's under his personal insurance. Like, so he didn't want to deal with the premium of this and that. And like, no, you did that. You foot the bill. You know, you're the one. Like, it's the cult of personal responsibility. Like, yes, you have to be responsible for things that you create. They just push that needle so far into like crazy town
Yeah.
in terms of like the extremist angle of it. And it's like, um,
So
so
out of that, it's hard to gauge what's normal when it comes
yeah,
to
yeah. Oh yeah, I've definitely been I've found myself in a number of situations where uh, because of a certain amount of buy-in, like once I screw myself up, like okay, I'm going to be part of this sort of situation and organization. I'm going to get behind it and like go to work, put in my time. When I'm at work, yeah, it's a little bit intense. My boundaries are a little bit off. I'm maybe a little bit too eager to get shit done at times.
mm-hmm.
And also another thing, which uh, annoyed some people that I work for. Another thing in sort of Scientology construction is like when they decide to build something, man, does that wallet open up. I mean, it's like money's no object when it comes to like certain types of materials and whatnot. Fuck paying the people. But like some of the like, 4 years doing electrical work for them, at, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was the type of electrical connections that we were using. It was, um, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but it wasn't just like a little wire nut or a little thing like that. You crimped all the wires together, and then you had this heat shrink on that you took a heat gun or a torch to, and insulated that. These were every single connection was like a waterproof connection. And from what I understood, the place we were getting the heat shrink waterproof electrical proof, or the heat shrink from, we were getting it from Raytheon, and they had three big customers for this particular product. That was NASA, Disney, and the Church of Scientology.
Oh my gosh!
For that particular product, those were the biggest buyers.
Did this ever cross your mind as you're working? Did you ever stop and once think, whoa, like these products, these materials we're building with, they're so grand, but I'm not getting paid anything. Did you ever have that?
No, because we don't. Especially in the Sea Org, you don't have to interface with the economy and money and finance.
Got it. You're stuck in
the same way. You're sort of cut off from that angle of it. You're provided with a lot of things, and then like, oh, and here's like some extra, like, that extra bit of money is just supposed to be that little bit of extra money, but the bulk of that is supposed to be taken care of. Never mind the fact that it's not taken care of. Never mind the fact that more often than not I was buying my own shoes. Or yeah. So
okay, so you moved back to LA. You did some more electrical work. It was really inconsistent and unstable. And then where did you go from there?
From there, essentially, there was enough work history for me built up as an electrician that I was able to just put out resumes and get hired. But then also, once 2008, rolled around, all construction in LA stopped. So got on with this company for like 6-8 months or however long I was with them, or that particular company. And seemed promising, but then they immediately have to downsize just to their foreman and a couple of helpers, and that's it. So it's like all of their journeyman guys out, so, okay, well, I'm fucked. So, so got laid off from that, and then ended up doing retail security in West LA for a couple of years. Security work in LA is also shady. So I mean, it's you're working as an employee, but you get paid as a contractor, and you just get 1099 for everything, even though just all kinds of work off the clock and all kinds of things not getting paid for. And you're taking 10, $15 an hour tops, and no, like the company's not paying any payroll taxes. So did that for a couple of years, and then the other kind of employment scam, sold shoes for at Macy's for a little bit. Got fired for using the wrong coupon. But that's another thing where at Macy's, they're at least they're it was supposed to be a commission job, and got paid like $10 an hour, and then you're supposed to have commissions on top of that. But the commissions were in relation to your sales goal, and your sales goal changed based off of the time of year. So you're not really getting paid on commission. The only commission you get paid on is for whatever you exceed from your sales goal. So your sales goal is just to get you that $10. And so it's not really a commission job. So that's bullshit. So, and then getting fired for using the wrong, like I wasn't allowed to use that coupon for the pair of shoes that I bought, kind of thing. Like that's what they decided to fire me for. And also you couldn't get the employee discount unless you put it on your Macy's card, which was like a 30% APR credit card.
Crazy.
It's like,
no,
it's not really a discount if you're giving me a 10% off, but then charging 30% interest. It's,
exactly.
Like that's not, so Macy's is shady as fuck, but I don't know. Then after that, I think from there, after, a couple months of unemployment, that's where I got the job as a superintendent for commercial buildings. And that's a bit more supervisory, but that's also where the flashbacks started kicking in really hard. But yeah, one thing that really got to me that I had to deal with a lot is there were these lighting transformers that would blow out, and just that smell of fried electrical. Even though I didn't like blow myself up doing electrical work on the RPF or working for the church, I never shocked myself. I mean, I caused some sparks at different times, maybe some, actually no, I did get some minor shocks, but I was never hospitalized. I never had to I never got like such a big zinger that I was like walking around a little bit. And there were a couple of those that I definitely witnessed. There's somebody working on an air conditioner. She's up in the ceiling, got zapped by it was a 480 volt air conditioner.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. We're not talking about like small things. We're not like, we're fucking around with an outlet. It's like, no, we're working on big gear, relatively speaking. So I mean, she got a real big zinger because just there's no safety culture. There was no safety culture whatsoever.
So you said that leaving Scientology, it's better to leave slowly, and I guess like in a slow manner or a slow progression if you have resources outside of Scientology to kind of hang on to. So for you, it was your ability to find jobs outside of Scientology, and probably your mother as well, because you said she would support you no matter what. So that gave you access to the outside world. So now I'm wondering, were they ever calling you or harassing you to come back to get auditing or any other services?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
During that time?
Absolutely. That didn't stop until, oh God. That's another thing, whereas they were having my friends call me. Old friends like, oh yeah, I'm looking, the guy, Yeah, the guy that was on the other end of the pipe that took, well, one of the guys that was on the other end of the pipe that took he called me up at one point. He's like, yeah, they call, whenever there's a re-release of books or or something like that. That didn't stop until a few years back, where I basically said, yeah, this is a new phone. I don't know who you are. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. It's like, are you sure you sound like Tyler? It's like, I wouldn't know. So do with that what you want. Yeah, new phone, who dis? It's just like, uh, just, and then, yeah, I mean, the last time, like, there was a recent thing where I got a call from one of their, call-in centers to come to some event or another, and I didn't even answer any of his questions. I was like, yeah, who are you? And what are you calling about? Where are you calling from? How did you get this number? And what are you calling about? Why are you calling? Like, just not even answering a question. And he's like getting like, he's like, oh, I'm just, he got to the point where he got a little bit flustered. It's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go now then. It's like,
you should.
yeah, I'm not gonna play the game anymore.
That's enough.
But
so when would you say that you
then,
felt like you were fully out, like you transitioned out and you were away?
Yeah, I didn't. Okay, so I lost my eye in actually January of 2000. I don't think I was fully out and away with a support structure that was separate from Scientology. I don't think I achieved that with any kind of stability until about 2010. So to just between like, there's a 7-year bout of functional depression in there of like, okay, go to work, do your job, come home, play video games, crash out, wake up, go to work, like, years of that. Years of that. Oh, there's a new release on this game that we're playing. All right, guess I'm calling sick. Calling sick. We're gonna use vacation just to like glue myself to a screen.
What do you think?
So a lot of escape.
Or like, what do you feel makes leaving Scientology different from other cults or religions? Because you mentioned that some of your friends growing up in school were Mormon, or maybe from like a Jehovah's Witness, or even like not wanting to follow or practice Christianity anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think makes Scientology
Right.
different? When it
what makes Scientology different is, well, the Jehovah's Witnesses in particular are also pretty bad about, their version is disfellowship. And what makes, I would say, Scientology and to a certain extent Jehovah's Witnesses and maybe some elements of the Mormon Church and some other Christian denominations, I'm sure, and compared to like just straight like, hey, we're Catholic or Lutheran or fairly mainstream. Well, even at a Catholic school, you get a fairly comprehensive education in terms of comparative ideas. You can still take a class that gives you some amount that's expected you to employ some critical thinking at a Catholic school. Whereas in the Scientology school, it's like, no, you're not going to develop any kind of investigative or critical thinking skills. You're going to learn Hubbard's method of investigation and whatnot, which is certainly interrogative. It is certainly questioning. So it has this air of skepticism about it, but it's backstopped by very hard dogma, very, very hard instances of, if this is the case, then if X is true, then Y is true. Right. So there's a lot, and a lot of those are kind of, a little bit in the background. They're not always active assumptions, but they are, thought-ending cliches that you just that ends up being relied upon for that to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, and not to say that the Catholic Church doesn't have its own problems. I mean, in the U.S., there are still a lot of child abuse issues with the Catholic Church, and I, you know, you sit there and go, well, what's worse? What's different? I mean, the scary thing about Scientology is that it, some of its worst elements are not original to Scientology. They are, some of its really shitty elements are just taken from society. Um, it, so another thing that's difficult on coming out is, yeah, I'm escaping this cult. I'm learning about, having, a certain amount of self-worth, certain amount of critical thinking, a certain amount of skepticism. But yeah, I've stepped out of my last layer of the Scientology cult. But what about the society cult?
Right.
There's a lot of it just it just looks the same to me. And then maybe that's just because of my upbringing and that's my frame of reference. So that's the only way I'm going to see things. Or maybe that's just kind of the way things are. And society is a fucked up series of layers that you could call cults or cult-like, and just conflicting dogma. A lot of the difference is Scientology is constructed and intentional, whereas society is more of a happy accident. It's like, it's just sort of incidentally this way. Like, we don't know how we fucked this up, but this is just sort of the way it is. But Scientology, that's on purpose. It's thought out.
Well,
Otherwise,
that bridge. So I imagine it like you have Scientology here, society there, and then there's a bridge like this to where you transition from one cult into the other. So how do you
yeah.
imagine, or what were you like on that bridge of integration into the society cult? How did that happen?
That I don't really know. I guess to a certain extent, I'm still, because I guess my limited amount of buy-in and I'm not a big joiner of groups.
Mm-hmm.
I may never really fully integrate. And I think that's kind of the nature of trauma in general. But my main goal in sort of distancing myself from Scientology and kind of learning from other people who have left is, my main goal is not to become reactive to or about Scientology, because then Scientology is still defining my existence. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of, like, okay, this is what happened, how I grew up. Okay, now I have to turn around and become a big critic of that. Well, no, not really. Because I don't want to be defined by it, so I literally have to go do something else. And that's been what most of my efforts have been, is whatever that conflict because the way they've structured their legal positions and whatnot, by becoming that reactive and or reactionary antagonist to, I'm feeding into their narratives, I'm buying into their game to a certain extent. They've already set that table, that chess table has been, or chessboard's been set, decades ago. That was decades before I was even born. So I'm trying to come up against this institution that's got itself already well entrenched in society, pulling the levers of society, or I could just go do something else. There's certain baggage that I carry with me, just in terms of my PTSD and my injuries that are still a problem to this day. So yeah, in terms of like an actual social contract, yeah, there should be some levers that I should be able to pull that would get me some compensation. But the adversarial nature of United States legalism, it's I don't get anything until I prove wrongdoing on their part to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you know, what if I don't want my situation to be influenced by whether or not they get punished? Whether or not, like, what if we just because they're not getting punished, they're not going to. The tax exemption in the United States, it's not the fact that this little cult has, you know, these sort of First Amendment protections is not really a big societal problem that's like on the forefront of everybody's mind. It's not going to get fucking addressed anytime soon. So,
Right. So your take on it is
so
to find your footing and to find your place in this current space and time, in this current moment of how the church exists. Kind of like that.
because it's not just my relationship to the church, but it's the church's relationship to society as well,
Right.
and how they've got all these things blocked up, and so there's a limited number of ways out that aren't truly devastating or traumatic. And then once you're out on the other end, it's you're on the outskirts trying to lay siege to, they're already entrenched, you know? People ask, like, how do they get away with this? Like, well, they're not the only ones doing it, and there's ways to get away with this. So it's part of the problem is not Scientology specific, but kind of how we deal with assholes as a society, which is we tolerate them.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's true.
We like, oh, he has a right to be a complete piece of shit. Nah, I disagree.
Yeah.
I think I should pull his nutsack off like a fucking paper towel.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and then you gotta pick and
to quote
choose.
Chris Rock.
So that's.
Yeah, I know. And like, yeah, I mean, was I born to just fight for the rest of my life because the world's shit? You know, I didn't have to be here, guys. I mean, to take that morbid angle of it, because the follow-up to that is not that pretty.
I completely agree. So now I'm wondering about your life now a little bit. I know you said previous that your social circle was pretty small growing up in public school. Obviously, the 4 or 5 kids in your graduating class of high school, and within this org, you referenced some of the people as your friends, but not really your friends. And I'm wondering, how do you navigate today?
Well, in a lot of cases, I'd say that I don't. I'm a bit of a recluse. You know, I moved to Washington to hang out with the trees. You know, I prefer not necessarily a lack of socialization, but my socialization really starts with whether or not I'm even comfortable sharing space with a person.
Right.
You know, if we can sit, because I can generally be more or less comfortable in my own skin most places. And if I can kind of sit there, be comfortable, and nobody's like trying to like, you know, push for a certain outcome or a certain direction of things, and everything can just kind of have a background atmosphere of chill, that's a good start. You know, so there's a build up. There's, you know, I am very slow to make friends. I unfortunately don't even like a person until I've like had some kind of conflict or argument with them. So it's like I don't like you until I've found a reason to dislike you.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, and so there's certain quirks. But here's another thing is, I was already a weird kid before my heavy Scientology indoctrination. You know, part of why I was taken out of public schools in the first place is, you know, my first year in first grade was very bad, and that was just a bad school teacher. From my point of view as a kid, I felt like it was the year that nobody spoke to me, but I was in a classroom of 30, 35 kids and, other 6-year-olds. I It was already kind of disassociated, decontextualized because I didn't have any friends in that class. I don't ever recall the teacher like speaking to me, like ever having a direct, like, yeah, they were up at the front of the class giving general instructions. They were working with students individually. I was never one of those students, and I was never addressed specifically that I recall. I think I was diagnosed with like ADD or ADHD at the time, but of course my parents were, while not actively taking courses and getting auditing at the time, they were Scientologists. So there's the whole, there's the legitimate thing of in the 80s and 90s, I think, and even today, there's a lot of kids being overprescribed for just being fucking kids. So that's a legitimate issue. But then the Scientology backlash of it is all Scientology is bad, or all psychiatry is bad, all fucking, you don't have an imbalance, like a chemical imbalance that's making you a little, off balance. You have engrams or service facsimiles or whatever other fucking, words that essentially Hubbard made up to describe things that are already being described in modern, contemporary psychiatry and psychology at the time. It's essentially all of his work on who and what constitutes them. I'm getting off track. So I was already a weird kid. Because of that, and I think some other childhood trauma. That was the year I started self-harming. I was hitting my head on concrete walls. That was my big thing. Trying to ring my own bell a little bit.
And you
were as a kid, I already. Huh?
The self-harm began at 6?
Yeah. Self-harm at 6. So, and some of that, some people are cutters. I like, impacts. That's one of those, But yeah, I was already a weird kid. I already had fucking problems. I already had socialization issues. I already had, but at the same time, my mom saved a lot of paperwork from that time period, and there was a counselor or somebody that did some kind of educational assessment on me at that time, and yeah, that all looked really good, like above average in a lot of ways. And my wife keeps trying to tell me that I was a gifted kid, which maybe I'll start believing, but at the same time, now I'm just a fucking wasted potential stereotype. If that is true, I'd rather just be an idiot. But yeah, it's. I was, like I said, I was already a weird kid before Scientology got their hands on me. I already had some issues, and then just all that really happened was the Scientology dogma of personal responsibility and learning was just shoved on top of all of that. And with a lot of what amounts to weird psychoanalysis. That's all auditing is. It's just a lot of really weird psychoanalysis. And
so what do you do to stay in touch with society today? Do you read books? Do you see a therapist? Do you watch TV? Like, what is your
I stay informed, but I'm very pretty much everything on TV looks like propaganda to me. Mm-hmm. So I think, okay, the one like sort of network show that I watch is The Good Place with Kristen Bell and Ted Danson.
Mhm.
So, and that's like, it's all philosophy, it's all, they put the trolley problem on screen and make it really gory and hilarious. So, uh, and the thing that's great about it is also I like it because it's all predicated on being a mind fuck from the first place. It's got a great series of twists and changes where, the so I find that appealing, but that's a fairly deep and it's a consistent narrative. It's like that. It's pretty clear that the writers and producers on that show are pretty serious about their work in terms of making it consistent, making it kind of a unique thing. So there's but like cable news, local news, it all looks like propaganda to me. I mean, I might as well be watching, the screens in 1984, and I'm expecting them to like tell me to, hey, you're supposed to be doing your exercise. It's like I'm waiting for it. So, and and also the fact of the matter is, I'm pretty cynical. I know if a technology exists, it's going to be used and abused by the people who have the power to use and abuse it. So I'm, you know, the screen of my phone's off, but I'm certain there's some, there's this whole thing's being recorded, like in some bunker in Utah that the NSA just sort of monitors and catalogs. Nobody's actively listening in, but
have you ever thought that maybe you're not as cynical as you think, and you're just critical? You're critical because you weren't really given the opportunity to criticize anything beforehand, and now you do, and your eyes are open, and you love to see. You know what I'm saying? You love what's in front of you now because you couldn't before.
Yeah, it's to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, my experiences mold the point of view that I now hold. So, I mean, it's an inherently critical and belligerent point of view.
Well, because I wouldn't say what you're saying. Like, all of the things that you're saying are completely off or far-fetched or wrong. They're actually embedded in some truth. So
yeah,
I call you critical.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Last night that what was it? The bullshit requires your participation.
Yes.
And I think that because of everything you've been through, you have such a refined bullshit detector that all of those cultural messages and undercurrents that people spew to each other, you have a refined filter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Even a TV news program like V for Vendetta.
Oh yeah, that's okay. I don't know how much of that you caught, but yeah, it's
bullshit requires your participation.
Bullshit requires your participation. So essentially, all the niceties, all the small talk, all the little cultural norms that are then displayed on TV, it's just red flags. It's just, oh yeah, I'm out. But at the same time, it's a level of bullshit that's necessary for most people to function in society.
Exactly.
Whereas, yeah.
I completely agree.
It is.
And your Scientology. That's just as everything with Scientology, including standard culture.
Yes. I don't know if you caught any of that, but
No, I couldn't hear
that. Scientology is already from the beginning very, very critical of society at large. Yeah. So I'm already coming out into society from a place where I was completely raised and conditioned to be critical of society. So it was the one safe thing for me to be critical of in the past. So now that I have fewer inhibitions, of just criticizing things in general, it's way turned up.
Amplified.
Yeah. Love you too, love. Not that I can think of.
Okay, so just a few more questions and then we'll wrap this up because it's been a couple hours, I think.
No, it's all good.
So I'm wondering, when you attempt to make friends with others that have had no association with Scientology, how does that go? What is that conversation like? Where you, well, do you ever feel the need to expose yourself and to say, "Hey, this is what I've been through"?
Well, circumstantially, it depends on the context. If it's one of those things where there's like a tabletop or board gaming group that I'm gonna go try and like participate in or whatnot, I keep it real light of like, yeah, this is kind of who I'm like, what I'm into. I can talk about comic books, this or that. I can do a little bit. I can make efforts to be gregarious, um, but so in those circumstances, no, I really kind of just, I don't have to put all my baggage on the table. But then the friends that I do end up making, uh, part of who they are, and this is, I don't know if I'm just sort of drawn to these people or they're drawn to me, or some mutual rising of some sort. One couple that my wife and I made friends with in these past few years, uh, both also pretty fucked up people. It's like, one is military vet, definitely saw some combat, definitely saw some friends die, definitely went through definitely was already a fucked up dude before the army. Um, Definitely too smart to be just, doing artillery. It's just sort of, so, and then his wife, definitely went through her own experience uh, of let's say, well, false imprisonment, let's call it, some kind of, some level of human trafficking, a certain level of like fucked up, you know, brainwashing, bad relationship situation. So, so there's friends that I can meet and immediately, there's types of people that I can immediately relate to due to just sort of like, either relating to the very specific, like, oh shit, just got super traumatic or super fast side of it, or the, yeah, this is just how fucked up everything's gonna be for like years at a time.
Right.
One of my one of the only friends that I made at the last company that I worked for in Los Angeles, was from El Salvador, and he had some fucked up stories about the goings on in El Salvador in the 80s. So,
Yeah.
and it's just, you know, and it's not even necessary. So it's the types of people that I end up making friends with, that I end up gravitating to, 9 times out of 10 have really seen some shit themselves. So,
Which is interesting in a way.
So, but
because
you got to be real about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where just coming from a certain place isn't enough. If you don't have any illusions about the trauma that you came from or the situation that you got out of, then it's a little, there's less bullshit. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about those very serious, very real things candidly. But if you can't talk about that shit with any amount of candor, then chances are I don't have time for your bullshit. If you can't say it straight and you're going to beat around the bush, it's not a language that I speak. I mean, maybe it works for some people. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't think it helps. Maybe somebody can explain it to me, but there's, and I don't want to, be toxic about it and like, say that, there's a certain amount of fragility or anything like that, even though that is the case. But I mean, coming from a place where you're not allowed to talk about it, not allowed to criticize, and not allowed to talk about the shit that you're going through, I think really underscores the importance of being able to candidly and openly talk about these really heavy things. Because if even talking about it is just traumatizing, then you're just going to be sitting in the trauma all the time. It's just, oh, you're in it, you can't process it through it. Anytime somebody brings it up, you're just reliving it. And, you know,
I agree.
you know, you got to meet people where they're at. And that, I think society, American society, and kind of what I see, doesn't deal with that. We really, really fucking missed the mark on that. And there's a lot of bad faith participation. That's another thing where it's, you know, the bullshit detector. The second I feel like somebody's even commenting or discussing anything in bad faith a little bit, where it's like I think they have an angle or an agenda or something like that, I sign out. I'm off. I'm like, no, I don't give a fuck. I don't care what your goals are. If you're not willing to just outright say it, I do not give a shit. You know, so yeah, it makes it hard for me to make friends. You know, it's just the casual. You know, unless you're, not that you have to be like, and it's all got to be super real all the time. It's just, you know, if it comes up, because let's face it, I have an extra spicy kind of PTSD. It's gonna come up. Mm-hmm. So when it comes up, it's an additional problem, and it doesn't, you know, just you know, layers things on. I'm not you. You gotta have some kind of ability to deal with that, you know, emotionally, physically, you know, however it works out. Even if you got to cry in the corner for an hour or 6 or a day or whatever, you got to do it. So,
yeah.
But that's also another harmful thing about Scientology, I think, is, you know, there's so compartmentalizing the blame, a lot of victim blaming, and compartmentalizing out the successes, you know, really creates an environment or a mental headspace where you're just so desperately trying to get to something good or cling to something good or achieve something good or get away from something bad, that you never actually end up, like, the bad shit persists because you're trying to avoid it so much. If you don't actually, like, sit in it, experience it, there's no emotional vocabulary in Scientology for doing that. You're supposed to, you know, make that shit go away and completely poof it out of existence. You're not supposed to embrace it. You're not supposed to, like, accept that you're an emotional wreck. You know, and that's part of, like, as you're getting help and you're only talking to, like, another beef that I have with auditing is it's this whole process. A lot of these things should be internal, maybe even nonverbal conversations that you should be having with yourself.
Right.
You shouldn't be having that. You don't need that third party working you over to come to the right conclusions, turning your gears and cranks. You have to have that relationship with yourself. So the auditor, the ethics officer, your senior, whoever, you know, the chaplain, all these people, everything that they're taught is taught to be, you know, they're going to be your inner voice for a little bit. You're going to have to, you know, talk things over with them. So you get conditioned to having those, what should be internal conversations, possibly even nonverbal, you know, more emotionally fluid conversations. You're forced to put it into words. You're forced to put it into a situation where you can at least, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense, but it has to be a coherent sentence in a lot of cases. So it has to be able to be understandable at the very least. And some of these things and experiences maybe just don't fit into that framework. So it's another example of, yeah, you're forced into this sort of point of view so much, and you lose lose out on the forest because you're focusing on the trees. You know, it's so that dividing, that compartmentalization, and you become reliant on this person to talk you through these things. Like, no, you gotta kind of steer your own ride a little bit.
Exactly.
And you know,
to find your own footing.
so that's a big, yeah. So even though there's plenty of doctrine within Scientology of like keep your own counsel and, you know, be independent, and it's like, but make sure you talk it over with your auditor, ethics officer, chaplain, and maybe your FSM, and you know, make sure that, you know, people with a good grips on Scientology doctrine have a good opinion, like at least know about it, because all those people, if you know, it's not as it's compartmentalized, but at the same time, you know, you talk to your ethics officer, you're going to get in trouble for something. You talk to your auditor, you're going to go through, you know, I don't need to necessarily elaborate how it's all kind of sitting in a circular firing squad. But
so what advice would you give to someone like me who has never had experiences with cult life, Scientology, radical religion, or just someone completely outside of the world of Scientology? What advice would you give me to understand people like you, people that have been through some shit, you know?
Well, okay. I think number one, right off the bat, for people who have like some extra spicy PTSD and whatnot, you know, just not even necessarily even related to Scientology. I think number one, you're going to have to be a little bit more, I don't know, because I don't know you really, but for society in general, a little bit more accepting of just how some of the addictive behaviors manifest. Mm-hmm. It's for some of us, in some situations, it is literally the only way to feel something that isn't pain. And so in certain respects, you know, there's value to it, but at the same time, you know, a 7-year functional depression of like being addicted to video games is not necessarily great. But at the same time, you know, and that's just one example, one personal example. I could have gotten addicted to heroin. It would probably be very similar. You know, it's, you know, people like us are going to come out with some very addictive tendencies. We've endured not just weeks of like, oh, this is terrible, or oh, this is stressful, but extended periods of years where not only is the baseline super stressful, there's people actively pushing, pulling, and trying to like manipulate that already stressful situation into like some kind of fucking ideal that doesn't actually exist. You know, so and we're going to react loudly. It's not an overreaction. It's, you know, one of the worst things you could probably say to somebody like us is, oh, I didn't think you would react to such a minor provocation. Like, well, maybe you shouldn't be fucking ordering the salsa if you don't want it spicy.
Yeah.
You know, if you're there to provoke me, oh, you know, you're not necessarily acting in good faith. So why don't you shut the fuck up or say what you want to say? So, but, you know, certain things, and then also at the same time, you know, when we do have boundaries, you cross those, we're going to get loud about it. And then on the flip side, there's going to be places where we should have boundaries and we don't. You know, it's, some people have hard, fast rules about like hitchhikers or anything like that. It's like, if I get a good read on you, let's go for a ride. I don't give a shit. But I, to a certain extent, trust my own abilities and instincts, in part because I've seen some shit.
Right.
And I'm not going to turn down somebody who legitimately also has seen some shit and just needs a fucking ride. I'm not going to turn somebody down who has seen some shit or is in the middle of some shit and just needs a safe place to take a shit. So,
got it.
So, I don't know. So, and then speaking for myself, like I said, I don't have a lot of buy-in. I'm not a big joiner of groups. I'm not a big fan of, oh, this kind of pushes your button a little bit. I'm going to do that a lot, say that it's funny. Like, no, I'm not about that. That's not, So there's little social games that people play. They try to, they think they're kind of lobbing a ball back and forth, and it's not. And so I don't know. Maybe. But just be willing to have a real conversation in good faith. If you start coming at us like, oh, the real reason is something else, the real reason isn't something is something that you're not talking about, you're missing the point and you're not actually having a conversation. And me personally, I'll get very upset with you because it's sort of like, well, don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to.
Right.
Like you're just wasting my time at that point. So.
I'm wondering, like, on what level do you feel this too? Because, like, let's say, for instance, with me and my project that I'm doing, you didn't ask me, like, a single question, really. I just told you, like, a basic idea of what I'm doing, maybe why I want to do it, something really light and really basic. And you're just like, yeah, sure, whatever. Let's do it. It sounds great. I'm game, So what is, like, your threshold? When do you say, okay, I have to be a little more strict, cut the bullshit, that's enough. I have to be weary of people around me. These are instances where I can trust them, and these are others when I can't. What are your boundaries with that?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, that some of it is like I am rediscovering certain boundaries. But one thing I think that in my time reconnecting with people that were also raised in and other ex-Scientologists, there's a certain kind of openness where, at least among survivors, where everything's fine, everything's game, everything's on the table. I can talk, say, do anything with this group of people in this same, because they get it right off the bat. Not only do they speak the language, they have the same experiences, or similar experiences. They know either what the isolation is like or the pressures of, pressures to produce is like. They get it right off the bat. Honestly, where I really start cutting, my bullshit boundaries get a lot tighter. Anytime I walk into a car dealership, it's just sort of like, oh, you want to sell me something? 9 times out of, like, I'm a super well-informed consumer. So by the time I'm talking to a salesperson, I already know enough to sell the product myself. So I'm really going to get down to like some technical specifics. I'm going to get down to measurement. You know, I'm going to get down to some stuff that, because the sales side of it, how this product is going to make me feel, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I know that's a scam. It's totally a scam. You're trying to sell me a thing to make me feel a certain way, and I don't want to feel what you want me to feel. So, you know, it's the entire premise of the interaction is, you know, based on a lie, essentially, because I'm there to, I'm pretty utilitarian. It's like, I don't buy flowers because they're pretty. I buy flowers because I'm going to go decorate something. Like, sort of like, I don't buy flowers because they make me, they're going to tie something else together. It's another thing. The aesthetic pleasingness of it is completely incidental in how it might make me feel. I'm only going to feel good about it after I've done what I've tried to do. So,
Exactly.
so it, I mean, not to say that I don't make impulse buys or anything like that, because I definitely fuck things up that way too. But 9 times out of 10, if I'm, you know, so yeah, sales, I shut down early and often. If somebody cold calls me for something, and I'm like, when I'm actually working at a company, you know, and it's like some distributors cold calling or whatever, it's like, no, it's taken care of. Don't worry about it. Talk to you later. Bye. You know, just complete shutdown. So, but I mean, it's Scientology is a sales cult. It is, you know, they're one of the central documents on how to disseminate Scientology is basically a book on like hard sale type techniques of like, you got to do this, you got to make this happen. It's for, you know, I just really care about you, and you got to make this go. You know, it's some fairly insidious shit. Yeah, coffee's for closers.
It's deep.
Uh,
So, wrapping up, I'm wondering, is there anything else that you want to talk about or add or amend?
no, not really. I think we covered like a lot of bases.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, main thing is, yeah, Scientology, growing up in it, it's a real bummer, but also getting out, you know, society's kind of fucking bummer. I mean, in the U.S., I mean, as far as like actual resources for recovering from this shit, it's essentially non-existent. You know, I mean, when you're in it, when you're born in and you're in that, you have layer upon layer of developmental trauma and insulation. You know, you're to a certain extent arrested development. You know, there's a lot of me that didn't stop being a teenager because Scientology is not necessarily the most mature environment. You know?
It's stunted your growth.
Yeah, so so there's a certain amount of arrested development, and then when you get out in need of mental health services, in need of like, hey, you know, maybe I could just, you know, go fishing for a year. It's like little things like that, where it's like, yeah, that might actually, you know, really help somebody through. That doesn't fucking exist. It doesn't. And the thing is, that's not even necessarily specific to Scientology, because, you know, its worst abuses are not unique to Scientology. Its worst abuses are shared by the rest of society. So yeah, we acknowledge all this bad shit happens, but it's an adversarial legal system. So you have to prove malice, wrongdoing, and specific enumeration for things that you don't even fucking understand.
Right.
You don't even understand what the baseline is supposed to be. So there's not even a road back from it. You just gotta kind of got to bushwhack your way through, and hopefully that intersects with some other social current that makes sense to you and isn't completely toxic.
Exactly.
So it's I think so. I mean, there's like, it's very difficult to, once you're in, to opt out of Scientology, and it's even worse for society at large because there's no way to kind of navigate through, and you have no real idea of what the expectations are. And the people who are willing to tell you, kind of assholes about it.
Yeah. Like, they want to tell you the rules of the game, but they don't really want you to play on their team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And a lot of, as my wife also pointed out, is another barrier to that reintegration is how the Scientology language and its nomenclature separates you from society. I have even though I don't believe in it anymore, I have a very thorough and well fleshed out idea of what the reactive mind is. Now, it's a completely bullshit idea and has no basis in reality, but that still exists in my head. It's still a piece of my social and linguistic vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, yeah. So in a lot of ways, it is like speaking a different version of English.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like a its own, I don't know, dialect or something.
It is absolutely a dialect. It is. I totally would say it's a dialect. Yeah. So it's a new agey, semi-technical, stupid dialect, and it is stupid. I just I'm not very smart, and it's fucking stupid.
You don't give yourself enough credit. And not only do I really appreciate you speaking with me tonight, today, I really appreciate your insight and you going into things so thoroughly for me to understand. I appreciate you taking the time to do that, because for someone like me, it's hard to relate or to understand, but it's easy for me to feel, because you talk about the things that happen to you, and they're so traumatic and they're so big, and you can tell it takes up the majority of your brain space because it's so big, but it's like you are living that, so it's different for you, moving along in life, trying to find your footing and find your way, whereas I'm an outsider and I can clearly see, whoa, this guy has been through a lot. So I hope you learn to take it easy and to give yourself more credit. And your wife sounds really awesome, and I'm sure she tells you the same. But you two are very good for each other in that way, because she thinks about things on a deeper level, stuff you can't piece together because you are the subject,
Right. Yeah. Well, and my wife, she was never in herself, but at the same time, she was raised by narcissists. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of having, we both have an opposite gendered abusive narcissist for a weird situation, or sorry, a same gendered abusive narcissist. It's like her relationship with her mom is not all that different than what my relationship with my dad was. It's just, we both have issues with authority, very much so. We have screamed at cops. Oh my God. Yeah, it's like.
You're perfect for each other. This is amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, in fact, at my last job at the campground we were living and working at, there's two notable instances where our issues with authority really flared up. One was, there is this guy, he was a bail bondsman from Tacoma who was looking for a guy at the campground, and he's just going around asking interrogating random campers, yo, dude, you can't, you're not a cop, you can't fucking do that here. like we're like getting into like weird confrontations where he's like trying to run people over and shit. And it's like this whole shit show. Oh yeah, call Thurston County Sheriff's Department, no help. Call them, tell them the whole thing. Yeah, this guy's like completely out of hand, fucking on private property, trying to like and just harassing random campers. Like, hey, you're Casey, you're so and so, you're the guy I'm looking for, and like, well, he has a gun, so don't try to engage. Like, what the fuck? What the actual fuck? You know, so so this armed guy is going around fucking interrogating people on vacation. Don't engage him. He's carrying a gun. Like, no, why don't you bring your fucking guns over here and get this guy off this fucking campground? It's disturbing the fucking, it's like,
Oh my God.
like what? And I don't, like, it was just stupid shit like that. Another time, like, there was, like, just cops just rolled up into the place, and you know, I'm out walking my dog, and I was like, yeah, hey guys, yeah, you know, I work here. Is there something we can help you with? And it's like, oh, we got a call about this. Is like, yeah, that guy's not even fucking here. You like, this whole thing, like, is just a like, we got into an argument. Like, yeah, you can go look because I'm not going to tell you not to, and it's a road, but like, I work here. We can keep tabs on things. You can like come up and ask a question. You don't need to like roll hard like somebody's going to get shot.
Yeah.
So,
Completely unnecessary.
Sorry.
Oh, how cute.
My dude, this is Jax. So
What a happy dog.
Ready for it. Yeah, he does all right.
Ready for the day.
So we got
smiling.
So, do you have any other questions? Anything else I can clarify? And I really appreciate you giving some insight as to what the interview actually means, because I'm just hanging out.
Yeah. Well, I'm just interviewing 10 people, and I'm going through and finding common threads in every interview, common pieces, and piecing it together and then writing about it, making an analysis about it. So one of my themes is trust versus mistrust or distrust, and how kind of looking at my research from like as an outsider, I guess you would say. So why people don't trust me as a researcher, what am I doing wrong? I'm just being very critical of myself, picking myself apart while telling the stories of 10 people. Kind of like that.
Okay.
It's kind of all over
really
the place,
cool.
but it should be something in the end.
Yeah. I'm really glad I didn't ask you any specific questions about the interview, because I'm glad I didn't prepare for that angle of it.
Yeah, you know, I tried not to tell people anything, and then they thought it was really shady, and then I had to disclose some portions of what I was doing. So with everyone, I probably told them a different part of what I'm doing to try to not disclose everything, to give them enough to where they would trust me to open up to interview. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that kind of, the way you present information is actually really important. So me not necessarily knowing what the focus was allows you to see more distinctly. Rather than me emphasizing it for you, you get to see where it actually contrasts
exactly
with the rest of the story. Okay, yeah, that's great. So,
and
people don't think it's great. I don't think it's shady. I think it's great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a really good rest of your day.
Thank you. I'm about to go do laundry. I hope you have a good night.
Awesome. It's Sunday. You should. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.